Ayubowan, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all you grade 10 students joining us here at Study Hub Sri Lanka. Today, we're going to dive into one of the biggest questions in all of science. What does it actually mean for something to be alive? It seems like a simple question, but as you're about to see, that line between living and non-living, well, it can get pretty blurry. So, let's jump right in.
Okay, let's start with a little puzzle to get you thinking. Have a look at a hen's egg. Would you say it's alive? What about a fossil that's been around for thousands of years? Your first thought is probably no, right? But what if I told you it's not quite that straightforward?
See, it's not always a clear yes or no answer. That egg, if you put it in an incubator and give it the right warmth, it hatches into a living, breathing chick. That's why it gets tricky. And this is exactly why science has come up with a kind of checklist to help us figure out what's living and what's not. To solve this mystery, biologists have a special tool. Let's call it our investigator's checklist. It's a list of 8 key characteristics that almost all living things share. We're going to use this list to really understand what it means to be alive.
So here it is. This is our roadmap for today's lesson. We're going to go through each of these 8 points one by one, starting with cellular organization and working our way all the way down to growth and development. Ready? Let's begin.
All right, first up on our checklist is the most basic, most fundamental characteristic of them all, cellular organization. Think of these as the absolute building blocks of life.
The number one rule of biology is this. If something is alive, it has to be made of cells. It doesn't matter if it's just one single cell or trillions and trillions of them. The cell is the smallest unit of life, kind of like a single brick in a huge building. Now, for some organisms, one single cell is the whole show. Take a look here at Chlamydomonas and amoeba. Everything they need to do to live, eating, moving around, making more of themselves, it all happens inside that one tiny microscopic package. Amazing, isn't it?
But for bigger, more complex organisms like us humans, it's a completely different story. We are multicellular, which means we're made of trillions of cells. And these aren't just any cells. They're specialists. We have nerve cells to send messages, muscle cells to help us move, blood cells to carry oxygen. Each one has a very specific job to do. And because these cells are so specialized, they organize themselves into levels. A group of similar cells working together forms a tissue. Different tissues then come together to form an organ, like your heart. Organs then work together in systems, like the circulatory system. And finally, all of those systems together, well, they make up the complete organism, like you and me.
Okay, so we know life is made of cells. But how do those cells get the energy to do all their work? That brings us to the next 2 items on our checklist, nutrition and respiration.
When it comes to getting food or nutrition, there are really 2 main strategies. On one side, you've got the autotrophs. Think auto, like automatic. There are self-feeders. These are organisms like plants that can make their own food, usually using sunlight. On the other side, we have heterotrophs. These are the other feeders, like us animals, who have to eat other organisms to get our energy. But, just getting the food is only step 1. The next really important step is turning that food into energy that the cells can actually use. And that process, my friends, is called cellular respiration. It's a chemical reaction inside our cells that breaks down food to release energy, powering everything we do.
And we can actually see evidence of respiration with this classic experiment. Look here. The air first goes through a chemical in bottle A that scrubs out all the carbon dioxide. So pure air goes to the frog. Then, the air the frog breathes out goes into bottle D, which contains lime water. And what happens? The lime water turns milky. This is proof that the frog itself produced carbon dioxide as a byproduct of respiration. So, we've covered how life is built and how it gets its power. Now let's look at how living things actually interact with their surroundings. This involves responding to things, getting rid of waste, and moving around. Now, irritability might sound like being in a bad mood, but in biology, it just means the ability to respond to a stimulus or a change in the environment. The best example here in Sri Lanka is the Nidacumba plant, right? The mimosa. You touch its leaves and they immediately fold up. The touch is the stimulus and the folding is the response. And often, this involves movement.
whether it's a plant turning to the sun or an animal running away from danger.
Now, all those chemical reactions happening inside an organism, we call that metabolism, they create waste products, just like a factory. Excretion is simply the body's way of getting rid of those toxic waste products, things like the carbon dioxide we breathe out. It's basically the cleanup crew, keeping the inside of the organism healthy and stable.
We're getting close to the end of our checklist now. These last two characteristics are all about the life cycle, how new life is created and how an organism changes throughout its own lifetime. Reproduction is absolutely essential, not for the individual, but for the species to continue. There are two main ways it happens. You have asexual reproduction, which only needs one parent and creates an identical offspring, like when you plant a cutting from a hibiscus plant. And then there's sexual reproduction, which needs two parents and creates a unique offspring with a mix of traits from both. And our final characteristic, all living things grow and develop. Now, these two words mean slightly different things. Growth is a permanent increase in size, just getting bigger. But development is about getting more complex. Think about a baby growing into an adult. They don't just get bigger, they learn to walk, talk, and think. That entire journey from a single cell to a mature adult is growth and development.
Okay, so there you have it, our 8-point checklist for life. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Well, now let's talk about something that pretty much breaks all the rules. The virus.
The very first rule we learned was that all life is made of cells. But a virus? It's not a cell. It's incredibly simple. It's basically just a bit of genetic material, either DNA or RNA, wrapped up in a protein coat. That's it. No complicated machinery, no organelles, nothing you'd find in a living cell. So this is the puzzle. When a virus is outside a living cell, it's completely lifeless. It's no more alive than a grain of sand. It can't grow, it can't make its own energy, it doesn't excrete waste. Out of our whole list of 8 things, it only does 1, reproduction. And here's the catch, it can't even do that by itself. It has to invade a living host cell and hijack its machinery to make more copies. So, is it alive? That is a huge question that scientists are still debating today. And that fascinating puzzle brings us right to the edge of what we know about life, and also to a little request for you. If you're finding this lesson useful, please do take a moment to subscribe to Study Hub Sri Lanka and click that bell icon so you get notifications for our future videos. So, I'll leave you with a final thought to ponder. Now that we have this scientific checklist for what it means to be alive, do you think it's possible that one day humans could build a machine that ticks every single one of those 8 boxes? Could we create something that is truly alive? Thank you so much for joining me today at Study Hub Sri Lanka. We'll meet again for the next science lesson. Until then, stay curious.